They say every dynasty has a downfall, but mine began with a coupon. I remember the moment I unwrapped it, sitting beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than my rent used to, surrounded by relatives who laughed too hard at their own cleverness. $25 off your next purchase at Value Town. That's what they gave me for my 34th birthday. And they clapped as if it were noble, as if it were generous. My sister Claire sipped her $400 Spinot with the elegance of someone who believed she earned everything she'd inherited. Oh, come on, Nathan, she cooed, flashing her perfectly veneered smile. Don't be dramatic. Thought you'd need it. Considering, well, you know. Her voice dipped into faux concern. Startup life isn't easy. They didn't know. Not the half of it. To them, I was still the family's stray dog, the dropout, the mistake Margaret Rose wished she'd never carried to term. She never said it, but silence can be louder than words. Her silence always was. Margaret sat across from me, her posture perfect, fingers dancing over her diamond bracelet like she was bored. Be practical, Nathan, she said, like she was addressing a waiter. You always had a thing for thrift. Consider this. A favor. My laugh came out as a breath through my nose, calm, controlled. They had no idea that the one person they considered irrelevant, me, was the storm quietly rising behind their empire. Claire glanced toward me again. By the way, she added, all sweetness and poison. If you want something more stable, I could talk to HR, get you in as an executive assistant or something. At Rose Enterprises. Keep you close to the family. I almost choked on my drink. The very company I had once begged to join, the one they barred me from because I wasn't cut out for business. That same company was now mine. They just didn't know it yet. I looked at Margaret, waiting, wondering if she'd step in and shut Claire up. But all she did was nod. It's time you learned what real work is, she said. Eyes cold as January glass. I folded the coupon, pocketed it like a keepsake. Not because it mattered, but because every revolution needs a trigger. I leaned back in my seat, the tension melting from my shoulders. Thanks, I said. But I've already got something lined up. Julia, my advisor, was waiting outside in the SUV. She didn't need to ask if I was ready. I was. I'd been ready for 10 years. As I left the table, Claire raised a brow. Another side hustle? I pulled out 2 crisp hundreds and dropped them beside the untouched dessert. Call it a tip, I said, for the entertainment. They laughed behind me. I didn't turn around. Margaret, Claire, Oliver, the whole Rose clan, still drunk on their own illusion of control. By sunrise, they'd be sobering up to a new reality. I was done asking for a seat at their table. Next time, I'd be hosting the meeting. They like to say, I left the company. The truth? I was erased. It happened in silence, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a closed door and a shrug from Margaret Rose, my own mother, CEO of the very company that bore our last name like a crown. I just graduated top of my class from the London School of Economics. My final thesis had been cited by 3 Fortune 500 firms. I came home, portfolio in hand, ambition in my veins. I walked into her office and said, I'm ready. She barely looked up from her tablet. Ready for what, Nathan? I didn't stammer. I never do. To start, at Rose Enterprises, there was a pause, so small it could have been mistaken for consideration. Then she leaned back, laced her fingers, and said, Nathan, this world isn't for you. No anger, just surgical disapproval. I asked why. She said I wasn't ruthless enough, that I didn't inspire confidence. But Claire? She'd been handed the role of vice president the day she turned 25. No degree, no credentials. Just a surname and the right shade of arrogance. She's a Rose, Margaret had said. You're something else. I walked out that day and never looked back. Not to the house I grew up in, not to the people who called themselves family. I packed what I had, boarded a one-way flight to Dublin, and took the only offer I could find, junior analyst at a firm nobody respected. They put me in a windowless office with flickering lights and a coffee machine older than my career. I didn't care. I watched, I learned, I listened harder than anyone in that building. And I stayed late. Always. They thought I was trying to prove something. They were right. 6 months in, I pitched a restructuring idea to the head of strategy. He laughed. Then he tried it behind my back. When it worked, they gave him a bonus. I got moved to a new department. That's when I stopped asking. Instead, I started investing. quietly, patiently, while Claire was racking up private jet mileage and Margaret was buying up vineyard estates. I was putting every cent into underpriced equity, small companies, forgotten funds, startups gasping for breath. And I built my own empire under aliases, through trusts, through shell firms with names so generic no one would ever trace them back to me. 3 years ago, I began acquiring shares of Rose Enterprises. Not enough to notice. Just a nibble here, a sliver there. Through foreign entities, retirement portfolios, microfunds. By the time anyone bothered to check the ledger, it was too late. Last quarter, I crossed the 50% mark, and no one, not Margaret, not Claire, not a single soul on the board had the faintest clue. Every laugh, every dismissal, every insult had funded this moment. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about clarity. You can spend your whole life asking for validation, or you can just buy the building where they used to ignore you. It started with a notification, 6:00 a.m. sharp. The moment markets opened, the press release went live. Majority shareholder of Rose Enterprises announces leadership transition. I didn't need to see the chaos unfold, I'd orchestrated it. But I watched anyway. Julia sent me the boardroom footage in real time. I was sipping espresso on the terrace of my penthouse, the city still wrapped in dawn fog, when the screaming started. Claire was the loudest. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, heels clicking furiously as she paced. "Who authorized this release? Who's behind this?" No one answered. The board sat motionless, blindsided. She turned to Mr. Blake, head of legal. "Fix it." He just swallowed and shook his head. Then the doors opened, and I walked in. The silence was almost indulgent. Claire froze mid-step. Her face went from fury to confusion to something primal fear. I hadn't stepped into that building in over a decade. Last time I had, I was told I wasn't Rose enough. I adjusted the cuff of my charcoal suit and walked to the head of the table. My chair now. "Morning," I said simply, placing a thick folder on the lacquered wood. Claire's voice cracked as she tried to sound in control. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" I opened the folder and slid the contents forward, official documentation showing I now owned 52.3% of Rose Enterprises. "I'm home," I said, "and you're no longer vice president." She didn't speak, couldn't. A few board members leaned in, flipping through the files. One cleared his throat and muttered, It's legitimate." Claire turned to Oliver, our younger brother. Poor kid. Always the mediator, always neutral. He just looked down. I leaned back, deliberately slow. "This isn't a hostile takeover, Claire. It's just overdue. You've mismanaged the Eastern Division for 3 straight quarters. The numbers don't lie." She flinched, and I kept going. Not to mention the $3.2 million funneled into executive entertainment. Care to explain the yacht parties in Street Barts or the spa retreat in Kyoto? "It was for client relations," she said. But even she didn't believe it. Julia entered the room next, handing out audit reports. Her presence was like mine, calm, unapologetic. Claire's eyes darted as the room filled with whispered disbelief. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything?" Claire finally spat. "This is our family's company." I smiled. No, it was Margaret's company. And she gave it away, 1 share at a time, because she was too arrogant to see me coming. Just then, the phone rang. Margaret. I answered on speaker. "Nathan." Her voice was steel, still trying to maintain control. "This is a mistake. You think the board will stand behind you? They already have," I said calmly. "They're looking at proof of incompetence, embezzlement, and decades of nepotism. This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, I know," I replied. "That's why I've prepared legal documents dissolving your executive veto rights, effective immediately." Silence, then a click. She hung up. Claire's composure cracked like cheap glass. "You'll pay for this." I stood. "No, Claire, you already have." I turned to the board. Motion to appoint interim CEO and restructure executive leadership? All hands went up, except Claire's. "I suggest," I said, walking toward the door, "you clean out your office before HR does it for you." She didn't move, so I walked out and let the security team handle it. That evening, the skyline looked different. Brighter? Maybe? Or maybe that was just me. Julia handed me a champagne flute. "It's done." "Not yet," I said. Margaret's filing injunctions. "Trying to block shareholder authority. We expected that." I nodded, eyes on the horizon. She's still playing chess, but I've already taken her queen. Julia raised a brow. Then, what's next? I took a slow sip. Now we remove the board she built, one piece at a time. She clinked her glass to mine. Checkmate's coming. They say empires don't fall overnight. Whoever said that never met Margaret Rose. By dawn the next day, legal threats started rolling in like tides. Her lawyers moved fast temporary injunctions, motions to freeze assets, demands to audit every transaction tied to me. It was a full-blown counterattack, cloaked in old world polish and 1,000 billable hours. Julia was waiting in my office when I arrived. She looked up from her laptop with that half smirk she wore whenever someone underestimated us. Margaret's throwing the book, she said, accusing you of insider trading, fraudulent acquisition, conflict of interest, you name it. I took the cup of black coffee from her, no cream, no sugar. Did she go public? Not yet, she replied, tapping the keyboard. But the PR firm she's used for decades just cut ties. I raised an eyebrow. Smart of them. Not really, Julia grinned. They're working for us now. I didn't laugh. There wasn't time. Margaret had always relied on leverage power through legacy, image, and intimidation. But I'd spent years dismantling the structure she believed was invincible. 3 days ago, I dissolved every shell company under Rose Holdings, the old umbrella entity she assumed I still operated under. All of my assets, my shares, and my capital were quietly transferred to Imperium Capital, a trust built like a vault and registered overseas with a board that existed only on encrypted paper. She was swinging at shadows, and I made sure those shadows bled just enough to make her believe she was winning. Later that morning, I received a call. Margaret. Her voice came through like cold air. So, this is your endgame, she said. Take everything. Burn the house down. I took a long pause. You lit the match, Mother. I just gave the wind direction. You've humiliated this family. No, I said quietly. You did. When you chose optics over blood. When you paraded Claire around like she built the company. When all she did was inherit it like a hand-me-down. When you looked at me like an outsider for having ambition. You were never meant to lead, she snapped. You don't inspire loyalty. And yet, I said, the company voted with their signatures. You didn't just lose control. You lost trust. She went silent, and I smiled. Because silence is Margaret's tell. It's what she uses when she's already lost the argument and is calculating the next blow. I hung up before she could find it. That afternoon, the financial press caught wind of the power shift. The Wall Street Ledger ran a headline, Rose Enterprises coup. Son of CEO emerges as majority shareholder. The piece was brutal. It didn't just expose the takeover, it unpacked the spending scandals, the failed projects under Claire's oversight, the loss margins in the Eastern Division. They even included a chart of executive expense reports over 5 years. At the bottom, a quote from an anonymous board member, Nathan didn't take the company. He rescued it. Julia forwarded me the link. I skimmed it, but my attention stayed on one line. Sources suggest Nathan Rose has been planning this for nearly a decade. They weren't wrong. The next blow came from Claire. She stormed into my office 2 days later, flanked by Oliver, who looked mortified to be there. She dropped a thick binder on my desk. You want transparency? Here it is. Every decision I made, every project I approved, every client I retained. I opened the binder, flipped through the first few pages, and saw nothing I didn't already know. And, you think I'm corrupt, she hissed. You think I stole from this company, but I was trying to keep it alive while you were out there playing secret agent. You call it saving, I said evenly, but I call it siphoning. You didn't reinvest. You indulged. Oliver tried to intervene. Maybe we can... No, I cut in. This isn't a debate. This is a reckoning. Claire looked at me with something between contempt and regret. You'll regret pushing us out. You think running this company is about revenge, but it's not. It's blood and grit and compromise. It's family. I stood slowly. No, Claire, it was family. Until you all decided I wasn't one of you. I opened a drawer and pulled out a file. And SEC, certified audit. Her eyes scanned the summary page and all the color drained from her face. Misused funds, duplicate invoices, undocumented entertainment costs. There was no salvaging it. I've already sent copies to the federal board, I said, and the ethics committee. Oliver exhaled quietly beside her. Claire said nothing. She just walked out. That was the last time she ever entered that office. The fallout was fast. Shareholders began publicly aligning with me. Two major clients reached out asking to renegotiate under new terms, finally feeling confident enough to engage without Claire's oversight. Margaret? She tried one last press release painting herself as the matriarch betrayed by an ungrateful son. But no one bought it. The media tore through her narrative like wolves through snow. Too many receipts. Too many years of neglect. And then came the final blow, an emergency shareholder vote. 94% support. Margaret Rose was officially removed from the board. Julia and I watched the announcement live from the rooftop. She passed me a glass of whiskey, this time no champagne. That was surgical, she said. I nodded. It had to be. Is it over? She asked. I looked out over the skyline. No, I said, not yet. Because Margaret still had power. Not in the boardroom, not on the balance sheet, but in influence, in whispers, in people who still remembered the old empire. And I wasn't done burying it. It's strange how silence can sound triumphant. The boardroom was quiet as I signed the final executive order. A full reorganization of Rose Enterprises. Names that once lined the org chart, Margaret, Claire, their loyal inner circle, were officially scrubbed out. Julia stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, arms crossed, watching the Manhattan skyline like it was a battlefield we'd just conquered. Want to say a few words to the team? She asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Let them feel the shift before they hear it. Because this wasn't just about replacing a name on a door. It was about reshaping the soul of a company that had rotted from the inside. I didn't want applause. I wanted change. That afternoon, Margaret called again. I let it ring twice before answering. You think you've won? She said, voice low and sharp like the edge of a knife. I have, I said, but not in the way you think. Everything we built, you built it for yourself, I interrupted. You used our name like a shield and a weapon. You cut out anyone who didn't mirror your ambition or your image. You were never ready to lead, she hissed. You're weak. No, I said, I'm just not cruel. She fell silent, and I pictured her sitting in that oversized library she used for interviews, surrounded by shelves of unread biographies and vintage ledgers, echoes of an empire she used to command. I didn't dismantle your legacy, I added. You did that? I just cleaned up the wreckage. A beat. Then, softer, like she was peeling off one last layer of pride. You really planned this all along. I leaned back in my chair. Since the day you told me I wasn't one of you. That evening, I visited the old Rose estate. The gates were rusting, the hedges overgrown. Claire was already gone, moved to London, according to Oliver, who now worked quietly in operations, far from the spotlight. Margaret remained, alone in the house she once ruled like a monarch. She met me in the garden. Same posture, same pearls. But something about her was smaller now, deflated. You came to gloat? She asked. I shook my head. I came to offer terms. She narrowed her eyes. I'm not here to punish you, I said. I've already done that. I'm here because I know what it's like to be erased, and I won't do the same to you. She laughed bitterly. Noble of you. Not noble, I said. Necessary. I handed her a folder of legal papers. A seat on the advisory committee. Symbolic. Non-voting. No power. Just presence. A name on paper, so the world wouldn't forget her entirely. You can take it, I said, or you can fade into silence. She looked down at the folder, then back at me. Why offer this? Because I've already won, I said, and I want my story to end differently than yours. For once, she didn't argue. Back at headquarters, I made the announcement, not to the press, not with fanfare. I stood in front of the employees, many of whom hadn't seen me in over a decade, or only knew me as the forgotten son. I didn't wear a suit, no podium. Just me and a few quiet words. We've been led by legacy, by reputation, by fear. That ends today. I paused. I'm not here to repeat what was done to me. I'm here to build something new with transparency, with accountability, with merit. There was a silence, a beat, then applause. Not loud, but real. And that was enough. Later that night, I returned to my penthouse. Julia was already there, barefoot on the marble floor, sipping wine. Well? She asked. It's done. She raised a brow. And? I sat beside her, took the glass from her hand, and looked out at the glittering city. For the first time, I said, I don't feel like I'm fighting anymore. She studied me, curious. So what now, Mr. Rose? I didn't answer right away because I wasn't sure yet. The war was over, the enemies unseated. But when you spend a decade climbing, it takes time to realize you're no longer running from the past, you're writing the future. After a long moment, I turned to her. I think we start again. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove us right. She smiled. I can work with that. Weeks passed. The company transformed. Toxic policies stripped out. Board members replaced with innovators. Claire's clubs and Margaret's museums were gone. In their place, education funds, startup grants, mental health programs for staff. People started to believe in Rose Enterprises again, not as a legacy, but as a vision. And me? I stopped keeping trophies. The old coupon, the one they gave me as a joke, I finally tossed it. Not because it hurt to remember, but because I didn't need the reminder anymore. They used to call me the failure. Now, when they say my name, they say it with respect. Nathan Rose, CEO survivor. Architect of a quiet revolution. I didn't burn bridges. I bought the land beneath them. And then I built something better.